HyperHydration. Today we're going to talk about what hyperhydration is and when, if you should be giving it a try and how you should go about doing it. So hyperhydration is essentially loading your body up with electrolytes and water before a really big day to increase the amount of stores you have and the amount you have to lose before you're in a real deficit. And this has been done by elites for a really, really long time, but it didn't become a popular amateur or age group supplement until the last few years when a few companies started adding sodium citrate instead of sodium chloride to their electrolyte mixes. And basically, sodium citrate helps you absorb more water for the amount that you take in versus sodium chloride. And brands started to exploit this. The most popular of which you've probably heard of, Skratch Labs and Osmo, started adding sodium citrate to their electrolyte mixes. And then other brands caught on. Brands like UCAN, Goo has a mix of electrolyte drink that has sodium citrate in it because they found it to be very, very effective. And now sodium citrate is becoming more and more widespread in electrolyte mixes. But we're here to talk about hyperhydration, and sodium citrate really makes this possible because it does allow us to hold on to more water for the same amount taken in as opposed to sodium chloride. And a brand called Osmo came out with Preload hydration in the last, because it's been like 6 years now, 7 years. And basically what this is a buttload of sodium citrate, a few other electrolytes, and some baking soda. And you take this the day before, the night before, the morning of a big workout, and it'll help you hold on to and increase your water store. So let's talk about if this is something you would want to try. Well, number one, I got to flag it with if you have high blood pressure or you've been told by a physician to decrease your salt intake, then no, you shouldn't try it because you're taking in a lot of salt. One typical serving of a preload hydration mix is going to have more than a gram of salt in it. That's roughly 50% of your total daily allotment of salt following a normal diet. And many of these preload mixes have a lot more, where you would be taking in 3 or 4 grams of salt in the 12 hours or 24 hours before an event. So if you have concerns about salt intake, this is definitely not something that you want to try. Another reason not to try it is if you're doing an event where gaining 5 pounds of water weight is a real disadvantage for a significant portion of that event. Ironically enough, in a big stage race like the Tour de France, when they have the rest day, one of the keys behind their nutritional strategy and the reason why you may have heard them riding 2 to 3 hours on a rest day in the Tour de France is because they don't want to bloat up with water from all the salt they've been intaking in the days prior and start the next stage. I mean, we're really talking 5+ pounds of water weight here, especially if the stage after a rest day is in the mountains. So the same would apply if you're running a marathon and you have to weigh the pros and cons of being a little bit extra hydrated at the start of that marathon versus running 5+ pounds heavier for the first hour or half of that marathon before you've sweated out and you're back down to a normal weight. So it's certainly not made for every event, but it is tailor-made to long-distance triathlons and long-distance cycling races in hot conditions. Because it really gives you that extra buffer of dehydration and electrolyte loss due to sweat without the negative consequences that you would see in a marathon. Because of course, triathlon, you're starting with a swim and then the bikes are generally flat. And by the time you get to the run, in an Ironman or another long distance race, you're completely back to neutral weight. And the same for these long distance cycling races or gravel rides in the summer. It's hot enough that you need that buffer at the expense of starting the race 5 or 10 pounds heavier. So if you're thinking about trying it, I'm gonna speak specifically to the Osmo Preload. I would recommend starting with about half as much as they recommend taking, because if you go through the whole protocol the first time, you might find that you bloat up, swell up way too much to the point where it's uncomfortable, which I certainly found that. But I've also found that it does work really, really well for hot weather races. So it's just about how much you're willing to deal with in the 24 hours before the race. So just to give you an idea, Osmo would recommend that I take in about 4.5 grams of salt the day before the race in the evening, and then another 4.5 grams the morning of the race. And the truth is, I've just found that to be too much. Realistically, I've discovered I need about 1.5 to 2 grams in most hot weather races the night before and before the start to get a really good benefit without my hands and feet ballooning to the size of an elephant's. Another thing you want to keep in mind is the calorie intake associated with these, because again, the main ingredient here is the salt, sodium citrate. So you're trying to get that salt in to hold on to the water. And you can do that with a variety of brands. Like I said, Skratch is primarily sodium citrate. Goo has a special drink mix made with sodium citrate. Not all of theirs are, but the Goo electrolyte mix is made with sodium citrate. So you can do it via a lot of different brands, but you also want to calculate how many calories you're getting in, because if it's 30 calories of sugar for every 300 grams of sodium citrate, you may find that with that specific brand, to get enough salt, you're taking in way too many calories the night before or the morning of the race, and your stomach is upset. So big picture is that elites and a lot of top-end age groupers are taking in way, way more salt before and during the race than is typically recommended by companies. Because like I said, if you've had high blood pressure or you have a physician's recommendation to lay off of the salt, you really want to be careful. And because the consequences on race day of overloading salt can be very, very uncomfortable. But once you get it dialed in, and if you're willing to experiment at home before big training sessions, I think you'll find that you can get a nice benefit in hot weather racing and prevent cramps or push cramps much further down the road in an event than you have normally experienced by playing with some HyperHydration techniques the day before and the morning of an event. I'm going to link in the bottom to several different products that have sodium citrate in them. And I would recommend, if you're looking for a little extra boost in the heat, you give those a try.